On today's episode of Low Luxury Grails, we are going to honor a legend, Kenzo Takada, who recently passed away at the age of 81. But before we get going, I've looked into it, and a very tiny percentage of you are actually subscribed to the channel. So it doesn't cost you anything. If you like the content I make, just click that subscribe button, and I thank you profusely. He launched a truly revolutionary brand, of course called Kenzo, that pushed forward some really important ideas within fashion. And he also paved the way for other Japanese designers like Yohji Yamamoto and Rei Kawakubo. In the end, I think his brand served as an incredible entry point into luxury fashion, like I know it did for me. Their price point is much more manageable than a Gucci, but the design and the quality of the pieces is actually pretty similar. Even though they're not the most hyped or most coveted fashion brand, when I see a good Kenzo piece, I have a really hard time turning it down. Takada also helped bring in a style that's so popular now that it's hard to even call it a style, the mixing of East and West. That combination is a direct result of the circumstances of Kenzo's life. Takada himself has spoken about how different things were when he first arrived in Paris in 1970. Different countries had their own distinct fashion. France looked one way, Japan another, New York another, and so on. Kenzo, being Japanese, living in France, and an eager traveler, had to mix and match these global styles in ways that the world hadn't seen before. He quickly opened up his first store in Paris called Jungle Jap. And I know it was a different time, but even then that name was really controversial. While the shop itself was hugely successful, of course that name didn't last very long and eventually changed to Kenzo. He made colorful, youthful sportswear with loud prints, a style that is just as relevant today as it was then. He also put an emphasis on fun, and not just in the clothes themselves. His runway shows were known for their extravagance and over-the-top elements of performance, like roller skating or planned marriage ceremonies. However, Takada eventually got tired of running Kenzo, citing the same things that pretty much all great fashion designers do, like burnout and the ever-growing number of fashion seasons. In 1993, he sold the company to LVMH, the parent company of Louis Vuitton and Dior, among others. Takada stayed on as a designer for a few years until leaving the company entirely in 1999. He was succeeded by Gilles Rossier. I'm doing my best French pronunciation there, I have no idea if that's how you say it, but Rossier lasted 3 years at the house. He took things in a very different direction with a far darker and moodier tone. Even when he did incorporate prints, a staple of the brand, they still felt very muted. Vogue agreed, writing, "The collection failed to create a lasting impression. The Kenzo label still has ground to cover in order to develop a strong and relevant image for today." A change was clearly needed, so Antonio Maras was brought in to turn things around. He lasted far longer than Rossier, designing for Kenzo for a full 7 years. Maras brought that loud Kenzo romanticism back to the house, returning the company to form, I'd say. While a bit overly bohemian for my taste, the styles were very much in line with the times. He oversaw a transformation of the brand's finances as well, with sales reaching $1 billion by the time he left. With the financials back on track though, LVMH wanted to move on to a new goal, one that's actually far harder to achieve: hype. Because while Kenzo sold well under Maras, it wasn't coveted and it wasn't hip. Hoping to change that, they brought in the founders of Opening Ceremony, Humberto Leon and Carol Lim. In their 8 years at the house, I think it's safe to say that they achieved everything they set out to do. Sure, Kenzo isn't as prestigious as LVMH's crown jewels like Dior, but they really never could be at their more accessible price point. Instead, they simply designed clothes that people really wanted and talked about. I think there are 2 big takeaways from Leon and Lim's Kenzo, the first being their emphatic color palette. They color blocked the hell out of things, in a way that was really ahead of the curve in my opinion. Their looks were reminiscent of classic 80s and 90s sportswear, the same playground that Takada himself played in. It's also easy to look at a brand's influence by seeing how many people are out there copying them. And Leon and Lim's Kenzo was copied everywhere. Even today, underground brands like Teddy Fresh are putting out tees and hoodies that could have been Kenzo ready to wear. The second thing the designer duo did to refresh Kenzo was bring back the tiger head motif. Now an instantly recognizable staple of the brand, pieces featuring the embroidered mascot flew off the shelves and elevated the brand to new heights and new relevance. Even Michelle Obama wore Kenzo. That's next level. However, all good things come to an end. After 8 years with Kenzo, the duo finally decided to move on in July 2020. They cited their desire to focus again on Opening Ceremony, their store in New York. With July being perhaps the worst point of the global health crisis, it does make sense that they would need to put a little more care and attention into their brick and mortar shop. And that brings us to today. During the exact same time frame that Leon and Lim were reinvigorating Kenzo, a designer named Felipe Oliveira Baptista was doing the same at Lacoste. He oversaw things like the blockbuster collaboration with Supreme while at Lacoste, so it's not very surprising that LVMH chose him to take over the sporty and streetwear indebted Kenzo. It also makes sense in another way. Both Kenzo and Lacoste are perhaps best known for their animal icons, a tiger for the former and the alligator for the latter. Perhaps they see Baptista as a worthy designer to keep that train rolling. His first collection for Kenzo wasn't a huge success creatively, although it's easy to imagine that it's not an ideal time to be designing fashion right now, so I'll give the benefit of the doubt. Even so, the looks often felt timid and a bit depressing. I will say though that his use of sustainable materials is an important step for the brand. So it really remains to be seen where Kenzo goes from here. It's the dawn of a new era for the house, and only time will tell where it goes. I for one will most definitely keep my Lim and Leon era pieces in constant rotation. I mean, even right now, I am wearing a piece from their collaboration with H&M, and I feel like there's perhaps no better brand to do a fast fashion collaboration like that, because I feel Kenzo has always really been like luxury for the masses. But of course, that's not the only Kenzo tee I've got. I also have, for instance, this purple sporty logo sleeve tee here. And of course, that line logo is one of the big things that Lim and Leon did at their time at the house. And another motif they liked to use a lot was this Kenzo Paris badge. And you've got it in multiple different iterations all over on this navy printed tee. But sometimes you want to keep it simple, so you'll throw on something like this kind of avant-garde art printed sweatshirt. But even that has their kind of playful spirit imbued in it. They were also really good with their button-down game, just as they were with this denim graphic example right here. And this was part of the kind of hyper motif that they used in that year's collection. And one thing they were really good at was mixing up their fabrications, as they did in this piece here, where this is your typical kind of button-down Oxford fabric, but then this is a kind of knit insert going across the chest here, of course branded. And then of course we've talked about that tiger head, and we've got two of them right here on these K-Fit polos. One in a nice blue, and the other surrounded in orange. And you really can't talk about the recent history of the house without talking about the knits, such as you have with this example. And what I really love here is the different mixing of the textures. So this one is actually knit into it like a jacquard. This one is a different kind of texture, kind of stitched onto it. And these are then appliques that are stitched on top. And then finally, what I would consider the piece de resistance, which is this crazy striped mohair sweater. And this one I love because it reminds me of something like Lil Peep would have worn, something like that in some of his music videos, so that really speaks to me for sure. And of course, in the middle there, you've got that jumping tiger embroidered right in the center of the chest. So that is my nice little tribute to Kenzo. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, please take a look at the other video on screen here, subscribe to my channel, like this video, and I'll see you next time.